So
Yes,
how are
sir.
you, man?
Doing well. The price of oil has crashed, and we're dealing with a viral pandemic. The Democratic primary is chugging on for at least another week, and President Trump is going to give a speech to make us all feel better about all of this in about an hour. So, hey, in that, as far as I'm doing pretty good as far as that timeline can be, you know.
Dude, it's funny being here in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Coronavirus is kind of accelerating here faster than I think most places.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're the other than like the Washington State area, which is just screwed at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
I think we are the number two spot for coronavirus. So
Oh
like
wow.
50% of my mental energy is now going to coronavirus. Um, but but yeah, man, it's been a crazy week.
Oh
It's
my
been
god.
probably the most, I honestly, it might have been the most eventful 2 weeks in like the history of primary seasons.
Yeah.
Like without exaggeration, like I
Yeah.
don't know that there's ever been a comeback of this size.
I know. I was thinking, when we first, I know when we first got reconnected after, I think you went to Europe, right?
Yeah, when did we last talk?
I think end of February or sometime in February. We are talking about setting this up after we chatted in
Yeah.
January.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I was actually in Japan in
oh
February.
wow.
I kind of got in like ducked in right as as like the first case was hitting Japan. So I was like, it's not a big deal. It's like literally like 3 cases in Japan.
Oh
And by the
man.
time I got out of Japan 2 weeks later, there were like 100 or
Oh
something.
man.
And then the cruise ship thing happened, and like now Japan is shut down their schools nationwide, and like yeah, it was dicey there.
And I mean, I'm sure they're hoping it burns out before the Olympics, right? But I
I
don't know if it's
mean,
going to happen.
yeah, it's I think they're probably going to cancel the Olympics.
Oh, and
Either
that's
that, or
crazy.
I don't know if they'll cancel it fully, or if they're going to go for something that's more like we're going to do it without crowds. The
Hmm.
NCAA just announced today that
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I
they're
forgot
going
about
to
that.
play the men's and women's basketball tournaments
Hmm.
basically without crowds.
Yeah.
And what made me number one, that's a really, really smart thing to do.
Hmm.
Number two, what made me confident this is going to get much, much worse were the replies to that tweet. Literally, all of the replies to the NCAA's tweet were like, "This is a hoax. I can't
Oh
believe you fell for a
no.
liberal media scam. Falling for hysteria." Somebody put up a chart that said like measles kills X billion people a year, and this has only killed 50 people a day. And like, God, like the fact that that's the attitude in this country means it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Yeah, that's a rough place to be. Especially when I think South Korea and some other countries have managed to bring that epidemic curve down.
Yeah.
But here in the United States, it's just ramping up. So.
No, it's super interesting because it has peaked. It's past the peak in South Korea,
Hmm.
past the peak in China, but both of those countries, whoa, I've got like wobble going on there, don't I?
Shaky
Both of those
times.
countries have like implemented really harsh things. Like China has locked down the whole freaking country. South Korea has done like an incredible job responding to things, encouraging people to like change their public behavior. Um, it's really been incredible. Like South Korea has drive-through testing where you sit in your car and
Hmm.
they test you.
Wow,
China has a 15-minute blood test for it at this point.
man.
And that's the reason it's actually getting better in those countries. Like when it was, left to go on its own in like Wuhan province, or like what happened in Iran, where
Yeah,
Iran just wasn't taking it serious, and now all their parliament has it.
yeah.
Like when it's left to just go on its own, like shit gets bad very quickly.
Well, that's one of the most disturbing things about this. I watch a channel on YouTube called LaoY86, and it's about this guy who, he went to China and started doing videos about the culture, and about 5, 10 years ago,
Yeah.
he married a woman there. He started a family there, and he's an American fella, and he he has since come to the conclusion that the Chinese Communist Party is just, I guess he's kind of woke to all the terrible things they've done. And he put out a video the other day where, well, if you're not, if you don't think about politics, it's easy to overlook some of this stuff, maybe.
It's funny. It should be reinforced how little most people think about politics, how unlike us people are. People are really very much unlike us. They do not think about politics most of the time.
What got me was he put out a video where he said, the worst or one of the worst parts about this disease is that the Chinese Communist Party may come out of this stronger, because even though you could blame them for the entire epidemic, the rapid response, people are going to look at that and say, this is a party that can get things done. This is a system of government that can get things done. Meanwhile, in the United States or Italy right now, in these democratic countries, it's had to become an absolute disaster in Italy, it's had to become a disaster for the country to then, I guess, finally, shut down, like they talked about doing today, closing all kinds of stores and public spaces and a total lockdown on, I think, one of the regions there. And then in the United States, we're still spinning our wheels.
Lockdown. Yeah. The whole country has been told. No, I think you're right. I don't, as a disclaimer, I don't speak Mandarin. I'm not a China expert. Sure. But I know a few people who I consider to be credible on this topic. Yeah. And what they tell me is that the local officials in Wuhan, the city of Wuhan and the province of Hubei, are basically going to be sent to re-education camps, are going to be disappeared or whatever. They have a grim future. And I'm not entirely sure that I'm joking there. No, I wouldn't. But the National Party's response, that this has made people way more confident in the national level government. Yeah. And the national level government is probably going to take this chance to create a storyline about how, democracies are chaotic and they can't deal with this, and look how great our, party has done, and this is why our system of government is the best. And of course that's not necessarily true. Hong Kong has dealt with this great. Singapore is doing great. South Korea had a really
we just talked about a great example.
Really, really tough break because they had a cult almost dedicated to spreading it. South Korea's spread happened because of this wacky little cult. Yeah.
Oh my God.
There's South Korea is not mostly, but it's a plurality Christian nation. Yeah. But it's 30% Christian. Uh-huh. And they've got a bunch of weird spin-off cults for some reason. For some reason, South Korea is cult central. And there's some dude where literally 80% of some cult ended up getting it and spreading it across the country. And it was literally just all the cult members who ended up spreading it. So even though they had a really tough break that they really couldn't have helped, South Korea's response has been super good. So it's not the case that democratic countries can't do this. Mm-hmm. It's the case that America has not to this point. And certainly that, Donald Trump is a moron and is uniquely bad at this and is doing all sorts of dangerous shit. But there's other things too. I don't want to just say it's Trump, because I saw some, if you go to the mayor of Austin, Texas's Twitter feed, 4 days ago, the mayor of Austin, Texas posted something that was man, it really sucks that South by Southwest was canceled. Yeah, pull this shit up right there. They posted, South by Southwest was canceled. It's so tough on small businesses. Make sure to go out and go to bars and restaurants and concerts. Make sure you go do that. Incredible. And posting things from 2 days ago about how we just had a big gathering at the Capitol to rally for this and rally for that. And this is in the last couple days. And city level officials across the country are going to be doing this shit.
Oh my God, Mark. 4 days ago. Yeah. Without South by Southwest, some of our community could really feel the pinch. You can help. Go out to eat, drink, and listen to live music. Support the artists, businesses, and working people who make Austin special.
As long as you're there, go to, as long as you're on Twitter, go to the NCAA Twitter feed. I think it's just at NCAA.
Okay.
Let's read some replies here. Let's be reply guys for a second.
Okay, so here's the statement. The NCAA is limited attendance to its events to basically the athletes, families, and essential staff. And let's see what some of these responses were. Okay. Tank Zulko, or also known as, his handle is Big and Bald 6996, May as well. That's me right now. I just lost the beard. May as well just cancel the damn tournament. Such media BS fear mongering. More people die of cancer in a month than have died of coronavirus. Better yet, more people have died in Chicago from gun violence, thanks Obama, than this disease has killed. Wow.
Yeah, and look at the ratio on that. The ratio on that is great.
Oh yeah, yeah.
People are loving that. People are like, oh yeah, I'm all in on bald and sexy or whatever his name is.
Politically correct bull, pathetic, so sad. Media keeps driving this. The more you know. Here's a chart with a bunch of other diseases.
Yeah, this is the chart I told you about. Like, because malaria kills people in Africa, therefore this one isn't a bad disease. This one's no big deal. As long as people die. Like, yeah, just if you want to be pessimistic about coronavirus, just go read the replies to that tweet.
Holy macaroni. I don't even get this because this doesn't even affect I mean, maybe I am, I'm not a sports guru really, but like this person here, for example, who says teams work all year to get a chance, now they're playing a pickup game. Fans wait their entire lives, now they watch on TV. I can't speak for the fans, but as far as the teams themselves go and the economics of it, I mean, most of that remains just fine, right? I mean, it's the tickets are a pretty small part of the overall economic picture.
Yeah, the TV rights are the big thing. TV rights are the big thing. And if TV ratings go up because people are staying at home, like, come on.
Oh, man. So crazy.
All right, I'm updating on the subreddit that we're here.
Okay, good stuff.
I'll send a giant wave of traffic of like 5 people from the subreddit who are insane.
Heck yeah, I like that, man. What's the so did you start the subreddit?
I think we talked about this last time, but the basic story is that there's another guy who started it like a long time ago, like 6 or 7, not even 6 or 7 years, like 8 or 9 years ago, and it just sat empty for a long time. And then during the 2016 primary, at some point, as the bad economics subreddit was starting to get overtaken by like political posting, and people there got tired of, why is everything politics all the time? Why can't we talk about economics? Somebody just decided to start a splinter subreddit to kind of have political discussion, and they kind of took over the existing neoliberal subreddit, and that's how the whole thing started. And I was one of the original people there. Yeah,
I gotcha. Man.
Yeah, should I explain who I am for all the people on your?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if they know. I wouldn't ever assume that anybody knows who like a double Z list celebrity is.
I'll just to let you know, we've got a community where I'd say about 10% of people broadly agree with some of these liberal, broadly speaking, liberal positions. And then I think the rest of them here are for the memes and are of a variety of different political persuasions, primarily conservatives, and then we've got a lot of socialists here on Twitch too. So,
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's the
I'd
internet.
say more than 10% liberal, but it's a plurality at best.
Yeah. Well, so I'm host of the Neoliberal Podcast. I'm part of the Neoliberal Project, which in the last month has actually become formally part of the think tank, the Progressive Policy Institute. So we've gotten bought out. We are paid shills now.
Congratulations, the neoliberal dream.
I actually don't get paid, but I still have a job. But we do have a director who's getting paid, who runs the Neoliberal Project now. His name's Colin. He's a great guy.
Awesome.
And so we are formally part of the Progressive Policy Institute, which means we are kind of like things are taking off. We've opened up in the last month, literally probably 20 or 30 meetup groups in cities nationwide. We've probably got like 30 or 40 now total. We're in Sweden.
I saw that one today. I saw one in Alberta.
Yeah, we've got like 5 in Canada now. We've got Alberta, we've got Saskatchewan, Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto. Yeah, like it's growing at this point wildly.
That's awesome.
So it's been a wild ride the last month, kind of seeing how fast it's taken off after we kind of joined formal think tank world and got some institutional funding.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, it's I don't know. It's been, I mean, when I first found out about it, I guess I'd say about 6-7 months ago. I mean, it felt kind of like a breath of fresh air. So I can see why a lot of people are really excited about it,
There you go.
I do have to point out, though, one thing here from Catherine, who points out, make it clear that some of your socialists are nice socialists. And absolutely, we do have some nice socialists here. And we have at least one nice anarcho-capitalist here. Last username. Good to have you here, buddy.
Well, no, yeah, it's funny. I mean, I feel like things get poisonous the bigger they get, I think.
Yeah.
Especially when you've got a small to medium-sized community like you have. Because I would probably call yours a small community.
Yeah.
It's not, you're not on the level of, like, we talked about last time, how there's this giant hole on Twitch of, like, 98% of streamers have less than 2 people watching.
Yeah,
whatever,
it's pretty crazy, because, like, I just checked today, we are in the top 0.35% of Twitch. And like that means that the overwhelming majority is like like under 10 people watching.
Yeah, no, but you've got 140 something watching right now.
Yep.
You know, and so you've got enough people where you can still recognize the regulars, right?
Yeah.
You know all the regulars, you know them, they know you, they know each other.
Yeah.
And when you've got that kind of like kind of small to medium sized group, everybody can get along. You know each other, so you know if the socialist cracks a joke at you, that they're just joking, and that they don't actually hate you. Yeah. It's when you get to these like millions of persons kind of things, like the wider Twitterverse, or like the politics subreddit, which has 20 million subscribers and 10,000 comments on everything. Things like that become super poisonous super quickly, and they're terrible.
Yeah.
But as long as you can carve out little spaces like this one, I think these little spaces are great. Yeah. It's one of the things that makes me happy about the neoliberal subreddit is I think it's getting a lot bigger. The activity has grown like exponentially during primary season, but it's still got that feel of like we still know a lot of the regulars and they know each other, and there's like this community feel. So
no, I mean, I think that's really good stuff, because then you can have I feel like I don't always like to use the word productive conversation, but I guess I mean I guess that's the right word for it. Yeah. Where people are like, oh, here's what I was thinking, where people can be charitable to one another's points of view, rather than just kind of looking for points to just, okay, how am I going to attack this? How am I going to so I think that's very important. And I honestly wonder if it's possible to scale that up. I don't know. I mean, from what you've said, and I guess from what I've experienced, it seems like it's just not, at least not yet. But I wonder if the person or the people who run a community can just kind of set the tone, and hopefully it goes from there.
I mean, yeah, to some degree, you can just set the tone. Like if moderation on a medium-sized community is good, then you set the tone. The people follow the tone mostly, and you can set practices to some degree. But when you get just to be mega sized, like internet sized, which and let's not downplay how big Reddit is. Reddit is a top 10 site in the United States. Yeah. Like Reddit gets more traffic than like eBay. like it's wild how many people use Reddit now. Yeah. And so on the main subreddits, like you're never going to know the people who are responding to you. They're going to be faceless internet people. And so the presumption is always going to be kind of antagonistic. Unless it's like explicitly nice, you're always going to assume you have to like dunk on somebody or like get one over. Whereas like a community like yours or like some other community, if you know the person who you're talking to, then you know that like you can have a real conversation with them. You don't assume you have to dunk on them at all times. Yeah,
for now, at least for now, the only one who typically is getting dunked on is me. But typically though, people are pretty good to each other. So we did have a pretty heated discussion yesterday on whether voting should be mandatory or not. That got pretty heated, but
Yeah. I mean, what's your take on that?
I don't think you should be able to require. I don't know that you even could with the First Amendment require people to vote. I mean, but I mean to basically express their to participate in the political process. Maybe you can, though. I mean, under the same argument, you have the jury duty. But even then, I still wouldn't require it. I don't think that any of the arguments in favor of it can overcome the fact that you are still compelling people to participate in the political process. And ultimately, if people don't want to, that should be their freedom not to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit anti-liberal as far as a consequentialist take. Like, I don't think that it would make much of a difference, to be honest. I'm skeptical that like this is the way to save democracy, is to make sure that everyone votes. Like, I'd be willing to put some money down that like results would mostly be the same. It's not like if you're doing it because you think it's going to be like this great partisan benefit to the side that you're on.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine, and maybe this dovetails in the election results and that comeback that we were about to talk about earlier. I think there are a lot of people who see the results out of Super Tuesday 2 especially, and just think, God, Bernie had that youth turnout, and they just didn't turn out. Why didn't they turn out? Maybe if we had mandatory voting, that would have turned out, all right? But either way, so I guess I kind of get that, but I don't know. I mean, I guess we've got an example in Australia we could look at. And
I mean, not to get hung up on that topic though, but no, that was an interesting, part of it, that Bernie's whole theory of the election, that I can bring a bunch of people together. We're gonna get youth vote. We're gonna get disaffected people who've never voted. We're gonna bring them out and create that political revolution, and that kind of didn't get. It didn't get held up by the data,
Yeah.
Like it just didn't happen.
It was so. I mean, from what I've heard, the turnout for, well, I guess Michigan as an example, he had, I think, overall about 20,000 fewer votes in Michigan this time around, as opposed to 2016, and he dominated the youth vote. But Joe Biden he swamped him with 250,000 additional voters this time around. And granted, they were primarily boomers, but
it's pretty clear that Joe Biden is driving increased turnout.
And who would have thought that?
Like Michigan's turnout was way above 2016, the overall level of Democratic voters, and Bernie still got less votes than he did in 2016. So, places like Virginia had super high turnout, and Virginia went hard for Biden. And at this point, I mean, not that it needs to be said, but at this point, like even Washington has tilted to Biden. I don't know if you've checked it today.
No, I haven't.
But Washington, if you go to Decision Desk, Biden has pulled into the lead in Washington. He will win Washington. So, like, it's completely over. And the only thing to speculate about is whether or not Bernie will drop out this week or after the debate, or he's going to insist on running the entire time. I don't know. I don't want to. I could do a nice little rant about Bernie, but I'm kind of trying to get away from that because the primary is over at this point.
Reconciliation time, right?
Yeah, the primary is over. I'm trying to pivot towards, like, we've been spending months yelling at Bernie. Whatever. We can move past that. It's time to start yelling at Trump, who is actually the dangerous moron in favor of the country, or sorry, in charge of running the country. Right. And we're hitting kind of like worst case scenario. Like worst case scenario of electing just a guy who's a moron is that like some kind of like horrible thing happens and he has no idea how to respond. Yeah. The regular stuff is that, Trump might do really awful stuff like build a wall and just be corrupt and funnel money to his hotels and things like that. That's regular Trumpism, but advanced Trumpism is, people are dying of a potential pandemic disease and Trump is like sitting on the wall fiddling.
Yeah. He literally, I couldn't believe that he retweeted or reposted a picture of himself fiddling while all this is going on. Like optics. Okay.
It's wild how stupid he is. Like he's genuinely stupid. Well, and it's frightening to think about. No, like genuinely, it's not the same thing as not having good political instincts, because I think he's got some like base level good political instincts, but genuinely he is not a very smart person. Like he relies on a couple like heuristics of like speech and like patterns of just attack people all the time, never admit anything, and it served him well politically. But like you can tell he's not very smart. He can't even tell when people are making fun of him.
Well, now hold on a minute. All right, as he often himself says, when he's talking to a reporter who gets him with a question, he'll come back and say, "Well, okay, but remember, I'm president. You're not. Okay, all right. Must be doing something right." I mean, is it fair to say that this reminds me of kind of I think a line that Marco Rubio used during one of the Republican debates where he said, "Let's stop pretending that Obama doesn't know what he's doing. All right, he knows what he knows what he's doing. This is part of a plan. Is it fair to say that President Trump is just kind of fumbling this all along, or is it all just? I mean, just to try and present this case here.
I get the case, but that case applies a lot more to someone like Boris Johnson, who, by all accounts, is like a cold, calculating political operator. Yeah. And Boris puts on this act. He lets his hair be all like bumbly and messy, and he bikes to work, and he looks like a doofus doing it. And it's very much a calculated thing. Like he has really intelligent people around him, and he's an Oxford grad, like elite, super smart guy. There's a lot of evidence that he's very, very smart. Whereas Trump has decades of just kind of like, this is not the only evidence that he liked the picture of, him fiddling like Nero.
Right.
It's not that he doesn't know Roman history. That's not the only thing we're building the case on here.
Sure.
So yeah, for some, I think that's a fair thing. Boris Johnson is very much like, what if Trump was smart kind of thing. But Trump himself is just an idiot who discovered the right formula politically, because he's got some baseline savvy political instincts. But yeah, this is always the worst case scenario. Like George Bush, even if you hated him, would probably have done a competent job at like handling the coronavirus.
Yeah, I gotta go with you there. I mean, I think there was somebody who said, look, whatever you think of Joe Biden, whatever you think of even Bush and Cheney, they wouldn't have bungled this up that bad.
Yeah.
Ara Ellen says Bush at least had Cheney, much as I hate Cheney. And Mike Pence, if you're listening, you're no Dick Cheney. All right, okay, that guy was an operator.
Good Lord, Mike Pence is no Dick. What kind of world do we live in where we make that comparison?
Oh, I know. Oh man. Well, so okay. So let's talk about. So we've got our position here on Trump's takedown. Let me ask you first of all. I want to talk about Joe Biden coming from seemingly, maybe saying out of nowhere isn't right, but it felt like it came out of nowhere. Just such a comeback. Did you? I know Joe Biden was leading for a while until people started actually voting, and then he was briefly overtaken by Elizabeth Warren, I think, in October, and then but as things got close to Iowa, Bernie really caught up. Biden started to sink. Did you think Biden was done?
I had a bit of time where I did think Biden was pretty much finished, and I thought Bernie was the presumptive nominee. Not presumptive, but I thought he was the heavy favorite.
Yeah.
And there's a storyline going around right now because Biden is very clearly going to win right now. It's over, and Biden's the winner. And so some people are putting together a storyline that, oh, you people panicked and like, don't be idiots. Biden always had to wait for South Carolina. Everybody just got themselves into a frenzy for nothing. And like, that's a storyline going. And people have kind of bought into that a little bit, but I think it's wrong.
Yeah.
I think that it underplays that Joe Biden was in very serious trouble. Biden got fourth in Iowa.
Yeah.
Which, like, if you're the front runner, you don't have to win Iowa, but coming in the top 3 is helpful. And you follow that up with getting 5th in New Hampshire. I don't even think he got delegates in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And so to say that, here's this guy who's been, number one, he's been a front runner. So it's even more like disappointing. Like there are expectations when you're polling at number 1 nationally. Again, you don't have to win Iowa, but he came in 4th in Iowa and then in 5th in New Hampshire. And that was really bad. Like that's a bad sign.
Yeah.
And then Bernie Sanders, Bernie Sanders, of course, is the most danger. He basically tied for 1st in Iowa. Buttigieg pulled out the win by like a tiny percentage point.
Right.
But then Bernie Sanders won New Hampshire by a lot. He pretty cleanly won Nevada.
Yeah.
And like at that point, Biden has won nothing. He's come out of the top 3 in 2 of the 3 states. And like, yeah, it pretty much looked like Biden is in danger of just dropping off the map.
Yeah.
So like, I think we forget how that happened. And that people are like, oh, Joe Biden was inevitable. I think it's actually pretty remarkable what happened. And the whole Clyburn endorsement was a big deal. It helped him win South Carolina. The coordinated effort between Pete and Amy and Beto to all basically endorse Joe Biden on the same night, right before Super Tuesday.
That was such a massive
It was amazing. And there's a site called the Bulwark, which is a kind of a collection of Never Trump Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's a very conservative site, but it is distinctly anti-Trump, and they're all like the disgusted, true conservative, whatever, people who never bought into Trump. And they ran an article, I think it was on the Bulwark, that was called like, "The Democrats are better at this." Basically saying like they, in the ways that the Republicans could not coordinate, the Democrats were able to.
Oh, as in stopping the populists in the primary.
As in stopping the populists. That the Democrats are better at this. And this is from a bunch of people who are super bitter, a bunch of conservatives who are super bitter that Trump took over the party. Mm-hmm. And I think it's true. I think that Pete especially gets a ton of credit because Pete was the first one to drop. Yep. And then just a few hours after Pete dropped, Amy did. Yep. And literally, I think she might have just waited for him because Amy kind of has a thing where she hates him. And she wanted to be an after him. I literally think Amy Klobuchar waited until after Pete so that she could say she outlasted him. But they both dropped. Yeah. And Pete especially dropped and then immediately endorsed. Mm. And then Amy did the same thing. And Beto came on stage too and was clearly kind of unprepared. Beto just gave his stump speech. He had no specific remarks about Biden other than "I love Joe Biden." Yeah. And so he was clearly he had made this decision in the last hour. Mm-hmm. But so that happened. And yeah, the Democrats are just better at this. The Democrats coordinated where Trump could not. There's an interesting side story here, by the way. Sure. If we're all political junkies here and we remember 2016. Yeah. I'm looking at the chat. I'm looking at you guys. 2016. Yeah. I think the interesting factor that stopped this from happening in 2016 was that everyone hates Ted Cruz. I'm telling you that this is I know people in GOP world. I don't know a ton of people, but I know enough. And everyone in the Democratic Party likes Joe Biden, even if they disagree with him. Yeah. Everyone likes Joe Biden. He's Uncle Joe, and he's respected, and people look to him as he's got a ton of institutional respect, even from people who disagree with him.
Yeah. I mean, even today during Bernie's speech, before he started basically listing out, what seemed like, hey, these are the things you're going to have to move on if you want us to get behind you. He specifically called Joe Biden, first reference to him, my friend, and it seemed, and whenever he says that, it seems genial. But I guess by comparison,
let me tell you about Ted Cruz. Everyone, God, and we have this on Twitter. I'm gonna let me look for this on Twitter real quick.
Sure,
it's got the good stuff.
Sure,
I want to give you the good stuff.
All right,
I want to give your listeners what they deserve.
Right on. That's what we're here for.
Searching for this. This is.
By the way, folks, if you've got any questions, just ping me at me. I know we've had a few so far. I'll save them, and then we'll save them up and ask them a little later tonight, or as they come up.
All right. So here, I found this on my Twitter. We tweeted this just a couple weeks ago. Everyone in the GOP hates Ted Cruz, and not I'm not talking about the voting public. Ted Cruz was the number 2 option in 2016 behind Donald Trump. Yeah. We're kind of talking about why the Republicans could not unify behind an option. Mm-hmm. The reason they couldn't unify is that number 2 in the polls was Ted Cruz. And let me give you some statements from Republicans. George W. Bush, and it's important to note that Ted Cruz worked on one of George W. Bush's campaigns. George W. Bush, I just don't like the guy. Bob Dole, I don't know how he's going to deal with Congress. Nobody likes him. Oh, God. John Boehner, I have Democrat friends and Republican friends. I get along with almost everyone, but I have never worked with a more miserable son of a bitch in my life.
Oh, my God.
Lindsey Graham says, if you killed Ted Cruz on the floor of the Senate and the trial was in the Senate, no one would vote to convict you.
Just to let you all know, the yellow states are the ones Ted Cruz won. The blue ones are Trump.
Peter King, I hate Ted Cruz. I think I'll take cyanide if he ever gets the nomination. These are Republican members of Congress, Republican presidents. Like Marco Rubio said, Ted has had a tough week because what's happening is people are finding out more about who he is.
Oh my God, that's
everyone thinks Ted Cruz is an asshole. Just being straight up. Everyone inside the party and outside, in both parties, nobody likes Ted Cruz. And so when Donald Trump is starting to be dangerous, and Donald Trump has won Iowa, or no, Ted Cruz won Iowa, didn't he?
Yeah, he did win Iowa. Yep.
Yeah. So, but Donald Trump won New Hampshire, I think, right? And it started in other states.
Yep.
Nobody was willing to unify behind Ted Cruz because they hate him, because they despise him. And so there's just no option. And that's the difference in this time is everyone respected Joe Biden. Wow. Nobody respected Ted Cruz.
Man. I mean, I will say that the apparently now that Ted Cruz come around to support Trump, he's much more popular in the GOP than he was. Although I don't know. I mean, I haven't heard much about Ted Cruz in a while. But I will say that prior to the election, I remember he was described as very principled, constitutional, conservative, and I guess that didn't translate into somebody you can work with. He did do that shutdown. Like that was his. There was the Ted Cruz shutdown too. I think that rubbed a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I think the thing is he's just not. He's just viewed as personally an asshole. He doesn't play within the rules. Like even within the party rules, where there's like these you respect people in your party, you let people know if you're doing something, you don't grandstand on somebody else's plan. Like everyone just hates Ted Cruz. Nobody likes him. So not to get too hung up on that point, but
it's that could be the big difference.
It's an interesting comparison between what happened in 2016 and 2020. So
man, pretty incredible. So between that, I guess that raises the question of that I know I was really thinking about. For me, it wasn't much of a question. If it came down to Bernie versus Trump, for me, it felt like, well, I don't like Bernie Sanders. I don't want his populism to gain any more traction. I don't want him to be president. I don't like his policies. But he's better than Trump,
Yeah, this was something
that was the conclusion I'd come to prior to Joe Biden, I guess, really kind of re-entering the race.
This was something you and I DM'd about, I think, like once or twice, where I think the phrase I used was that I'd rather eat a shit sandwich than get bone cancer.
Yeah.
So like Donald Trump is bone cancer, and I choose that metaphor specifically because I think he like rots institutions from the inside. Like this is what happens when you cut, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of funding from public health institutions, from the CDC. He's shut down some agencies that normally would be dealing with this kind of stuff that literally don't exist anymore because Donald Trump shut down the program. This is what happens when you starve the beast. Like shit like coronavirus just runs wild, and it literally is like a decaying factor from the inside. It's like bone cancer. Bernie is just like being forced to swallow a shit sandwich, which I don't want to do that, but
you'll get over it.
Luckily we don't have to. We have Joe Biden. We're gonna get ice cream with Diamond Joe.
Okay. Well, I was curious. I figured that's the way you felt. But it's a discussion where I've had some people who have come the other way around it. And I don't mean people who are already pro-Trump, but people who are like, look, I want Biden to be the nominee, but if it's not him, I mean, look, Bernie's gonna jeopardize my financial future. Who think that Bernie is more of a, but not just that, who think that Bernie is more of a threat to American institutions.
I've seen that take, and I think it's silly. Bernie's a lot more of an institutionalist than Trump is. But number one, Bernie wouldn't be able to pass anything. Like all these things about Medicare for all and the Green New Deal, and Medicare for all it's not going to pass the Senate. Number one, the Democrats have to take the Senate. They're probably not going to, so it's not going to pass the Senate. Number two, even if the Democrats take the Senate and they get their 50 seats, it still couldn't pass because you have to go through Doug Jones and Joe Manchin and things like that. I'm actually not sure, even if the vote was just among Democrats, if you're literally just taking 50 Democrats in the House, I'm not sure it could pass then.
That's tough.
It's tough. I don't think the Green New Deal could pass the House, even if the House. No, number one, I know the Green New Deal can't pass the House right now. I don't think it could pass the House if the House was just the Democrats. I don't think the Democrats even have majority support for AOC's version of the Green New Deal. They probably would pass something, but it wouldn't be the jobs guarantee, like kind of like every socialist wish list version. So with that in mind, Bernie Sanders is automatically less dangerous. And like Bernie Sanders is not going to blow up institutions in the way that Trump has. Like he said he doesn't even want to like kill the filibuster in the Senate.
Yeah. And that's,
like,
I think that's a good, I'm glad you raised that, because that I think is a real good mark of, how do you feel about institutions? Because the filibuster is, it's inconvenient if you've got power and you want to wield it, at the very least. So if you're the type to blow up institutions.
Yeah. And again, this is not meant as a defense of like maximalist policymaking that Bernie does.
Yeah.
Because I'm very much not a fan of this kind of maximalist style.
So I'm glad you bring that up, because that's something else that would be interesting to get your take on. So what I've heard whenever I talk to people about Medicare for all or any other policy that Bernie Sanders proposes, that's the one that we typically talk about the most, because that's the flagship one, right? We rarely even get to the other ones. And if he were to get anything done, if he were president and get anything done, focus on anything, it would probably be that. So, what I always hear is, well, look, we've got to go with that. By the way, folks, 10 p.m. Eastern is when the Brick Brain podcast starts. But if we're going to get anything done, we've got to start big. You shoot for the moon, and if you miss, you'll land upon the stars. Something like that.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? I don't know that I've ever negotiated anything like that in my personal or professional life, but politically, apparently that's the way that a lot of people think it should be done.
So there's a baked-in assumption there, shoot for the stars, and even if you miss, you'll land at the moon, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
The assumption there is that the stars are the right target, and that the moon is second best and the stars are best.
Yeah.
It's kind of, again, it's a maximalist point of view that the furthest left thing we can do and the most government intervention we can have is always the best thing by definition. And there's like this assumption, everybody just knows that's the best. Everybody knows that the highest tax you can get is the best tax, and the most welfare spending you can get is the best welfare, Yeah. And so if I have to settle for less, I'll settle for less, knowing that it, more would have always been better. Yeah. And it's very much the Bernie Sanders school of politics, where, every single program that he has essentially is a giant government spending program. Every problem is solved with a giant new set of regulations, restrictions, and government spending. And the thing is, I'm not against government spending in like the abstract. I think there are areas where we should spend more money. But it's also not a universal thing. More government spending is not the answer to every problem. Right. And that's just a fact, because we live in a complex world.
Right.
The real world is complex. Policy making is hard, and simple solutions that are universally applicable just don't work. One approach to government will not get you the right answer to every single question. So when Bernie Sanders attacks housing, he does it with a massive federal housing guarantee. The federal government is going to build 10 million new homes or whatever. When he thinks about unemployment, it's a federal government jobs guarantee. The government will guarantee jobs for everyone. When he thinks about climate, again, it's giant government programs and restrictions, some of which in that instance are probably okay because climate change is that urgent.
Yeah.
But when he thinks about, medicine, it's the government will take over every part. The government will ban private insurance. It'll take over everything. It'll take over all medical care. Yeah. It'll take over dental. It'll take over long-term care.
And anything it provides, nobody else can.
Where you get that whole, he just wants what's normal in Europe. Like, no, nobody in Europe, not a single country has what Bernie is proposing. Not even the UK, where the UK has like the most nationalized service, but they don't ban private insurance. They have, deluxe private plans you can get. They don't have, I don't think long-term care and full dental are necessarily implied there.
Not at all.
So like, it's this approach to policymaking where everything is always a maximalist thing. How do we deal with like college? Well, number one, all college of any kind should always be free forever. Yeah. Number two, anybody who's paid for college in the past and has debt should have it 100% of it immediately wiped out.
Yeah, and hey, I'll take it, but I can't really give you a good argument as to why I should get it.
That's the thing. You're like this. I don't know how much you make, but I assume you're this suave, high-paid corporate attorney making tons of money and blah blah blah. And like, really, who college debt forgiveness will really help? It's not the poor struggling artist you think it is. It's doctors and lawyers. It is a handout to doctors and lawyers. My sister is a doctor, and right now she's a resident. She's in her last year of residency, but starting next year, she's probably gonna be making about $300,000 a year. but she also has $250,000 of debt. You know, she'll pay it off in like 2 years probably.
Yeah.
But like that's who is like the biggest beneficiary is people who are already going to be doing very, very well. College graduates do way better than non-college graduates.
So,
but anyway, not to get on.
No, it's just for funsies, just to talk about unintended consequences. My favorite thing is the combination of this plan with the plan to get rid of fracking and fossil fuels in like a very short period of time, but don't worry, fossil fuel people out there like myself, you will get your salary for 5 years while you find a new job. You know, you'll be taken care of. So either the salary or a substantial part of it, something like that. So I'm going to lose all my debt, and I'm basically going to get a new 5 years of free money to just kind of fuck around and start a new career with. Okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great deal for that's a good deal, but I really can't give you an argument as to how that really benefits how that really benefits the average American. I mean,
it's the whole idea of maximalist policy making is just that you don't need the same answer in all instances. I'm coming from a perspective where I'm kind of center leftish. I'm probably more of a center left neoliberal than a center right.
Yeah.
And so like I think at this point we probably should expand the welfare state to some degree.
Yeah.
I think that the Trump tax cuts on the rich should be reversed, that the rich should pay more tax than they're paying now. But I just don't have this maximalist approach to it where like that whole scenario you proposed where like shoot for the big program and maybe you'll get the small program, like that kind of assumes that I want the big program to begin with.
Yeah.
Like, which I don't in most cases.
Well, the other part of that is I don't understand this argument that if we ask for more, then when we compromise, we'll get most of what we want. I don't know that that's how politics works, because that certainly isn't how any negotiation
In negotiation, you have the concept of BATNA, right? For the listeners, like BATNA is best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So like what happens if negotiations break down? Like what is the status quo basically? And like the BATNA for the Republicans negotiating with a President Bernie is that they just walk away and call him a socialist and probably win the midterms. So like, like what is it like literally what is the theory of politics, even if Bernie Sanders gets elected, that he's going to lead like a mob to like Mitch McConnell's house to protest?
I mean,
like that might literally be what he wants to do.
As I know, I know that's kind of a meme, but the response that I got was, well, we're going to hold rallies and get these people, we're going to make them come around. Okay. I don't know that that's how it works, unfortunately.
Is this guy streaming from a donation clinic?
Oh my God, Gondom. Of all the comments to read from our resident fan fiction author, Gondom.
That's funny, man. No, I'm located in New York, so like I've got a tiny apartment. You don't want to see the inside of my tiny 1-bedroom apartment. So we record the Neoliberal Podcast out of this podcast studio in New York where you can just rent time. It's hourly rate. Super cool. And they also have live streaming, as I've discovered, so we can come in and live stream. But yeah, you can tell this is not my apartment. This is a very bland, like, kind of, we're sitting here maybe I'll bring a poster next time. I have a nice, like, poster from the Neoliberal store.
Do you guys sell that the poster with the ship going between the rocks of revolution?
Yes.
And I want to get that poster. Ours. That's a good poster.
I have that. Yeah, shilling for that. You can go to neoliberalproject.org/store, I think is the thing. Yeah, you can see that poster. I have it in my home. It's a fantastic poster. It's like the favorite thing I own, except for maybe the shirt. I don't know if anybody can see the shirt. It's a Feel the Bernanke.
Can you? I know Ben Bernanke, Federal Reserve, another big neoliberal meme. Why should we celebrate folks like these? Why should we celebrate these unelected technocrats in the Federal Reserve? I mean, shouldn't we be auditing the Fed, abolishing these unelected money makers?
Oh man, that goes all the way back. That's a long time. That's like a meme from Bad Economics subreddit rather than even just the neoliberal subreddit. But yeah, unironic worship of central bankers is probably one of my favorite things about like neoliberal meme culture.
Yeah,
it's amazing. More people should worship like Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke. If you have to like meme political heroes, let's make central bankers part of that.
Right on. Okay, so for those who are listening for the first time, why like one of the things I guess one of the elements of Bernie's, I would say less destructive, but still it's populism, so it's not good. One of the elements of his populism is talking about the 1% and banks and that
Well, I mean,
it's interesting.
Bernie
Skepticism of
Sanders
banks
is
and
a,
bankers is a real, it's got a long history, kind of both sides of the crank aisle.
I mean, if you look at the 538, forecast, Bernie Sanders is 1% chance to win at this point. So
Sure.
at this point, he is the 1%. So, you know, no, I mean, that's actually something that I don't think is all that bad. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. God, I'm going to be forced into defending Bernie here, but
All right.
um, so how much of a digression can I go on here?
Yeah, look, what I'm trying to get at is why should I think the average person, our average viewer, care about, even perhaps celebrate the role of a central bank in our
Oh well, so
system?
central bank is different than the big banks, I will say.
I mean, but there
Um,
is, there's some relationship. I mean, they got the bailouts of 2008 ultimately,
Well,
came
so
through.
so
Yeah.
here was my brief digression. Like you can
Okay.
think of liberalism because I am a liberal first and foremost. Before I'm a neoliberal, I would say I'm a liberal
Yeah.
in an American sense, in a European sense, in the political philosophy sense. And the history of liberalism can be seen as the reaction against unjust concentrations of power,
Mhm.
right? So the original liberals, like dating back to the 1700s and early 1800s, were fighting against like literal like monarchical powers and aristocratic landowning powers, and like there's an unjust amount of power concentrated in like aristocratic gentry, and the liberals fought against that. And then you can think about, liberal ideals say that we should treat everyone equally, and liberalism has fought against, racism, sexism, homophobia. You can think that during the 20th century, liberalism primarily fought against ideologies like communism in this, Stalinist, Maoist form,
Yeah.
and not fascist Nazism, and those were unjust concentrations of power in the form of like totalitarian states, right?
Mhm.
So you look at the modern liberalism and what we're trying to do with the neoliberal project. And part of what you have to think of is if liberalism is going to survive, what is the unjust concentration of power that it should kind of fight against at this current moment? Because it's not just about, oh, technocratic overlords all know
Yeah.
best and everything will be
Right.
perfect if we just have a technocrat
Yeah.
in charge. Nothing can ever go wrong. Um, I think there's a legitimate case that like rising inequality and maybe corporate power is something that liberals should be concerned about.
Yeah.
I think Bernie Sanders is the best liberal champion of that argument. No, but I don't think the idea is crazy that like the big banks and like big corporations have increasing monopoly power in some sense, and that we should be very concerned about inequality. It's not healthy for society. I think those are legitimate ideas.
Mhm.
I don't think that Bernie's ideas to address them are the greatest, but I do think that they are things we should, be concerned about and keep an eye on and try to fix. Now that's all this huge digression. Like I said, I was going to go on. Central banks are very much not in that picture. Central banks are like wonderful stabilizing agents for the modern world. They're part of the reason that the Great Recession did not become the Great Depression. They're part of the reason that inflation has been super low for like almost 40 years now.
Yeah.
And, nobody who's like, probably none of your viewers have ever actually experienced a high inflation event.
Yeah.
Like,
It's interesting because I was thinking about that,
ask your
and
grandparents. It used to be this thing that people actually worried about, that like their paycheck within 3 years would be worth like 30% less. Because
Yeah.
there have been times where, inflation would run at 10% a year. Like at central banks, we just don't have to worry about that anymore because they know how to manage it now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty incredible thing. I mean, it's only to me ever been kind of a theoretical thing, or something I have to factor in when I'm trying to calculate maybe the effect of a price or something into the future or into the past. Don't forget to think about inflation. But it's never been a real personal, visceral feeling. You really don't notice it anymore the way that it seems like people used to.
There's a fun chart. Can I get you to pull up a chart?
Yeah, sure.
Or you know what? Let me I'll find it and
Yeah, if you can send it to me on Twitter.
because it's a really good illustration. Not to get like too too caught up in this, but I'm going to send you this because I think it's an amazing chart that shows how good central banks are at their job.
Right on. Sounds good.
You talk while I take 30
sure.
seconds.
So everybody knows we're talking with Jeremiah Johnson from the Neoliberal Podcast. And by the way, I think we just got somebody just bought the poster, it sounds like. So that's really cool. There's the Neoliberal Project's website. Be sure to sign up. Got a great email list there, and a lot of good content there on the website. Also, here is their Twitter. You can follow them there. And the Neoliberal Project, I think probably the central piece of content you can keep up with there is the podcast, right? And they talk to all kinds of interesting folks, lots of good people, not just liberals too, libertarians, socialists, just interesting people from all kinds of backgrounds and perspectives, and it's a great podcast. So be sure to check it out.
I'm about to put it in chat.
Okay, good stuff. Yeah, chat's even better. Okay. Yeah.
So it's in chat now, and you can pull it up if you want.
Holy macaroni! Look at that. That chart, 250 years of consumer price inflation. Yeah, wow, so is this Napoleonic Wars here or something?
Yeah, right? So if I walk you through this chart, this is inflation and deflation over the years in the United States. And you can see what happened under the bimetallic standard. Yep. That literally this was, and let me see if I go to, hold on. If I go to this is I should note, this is a 3-year rolling average. Yeah. So there was a time in the 1700s when you had a 3-year rolling average of 40% inflation, followed immediately by a 3-year rolling average of 30% deflation. So for years straight, you would have this. And then you look at what happened under the gold standard, it got a little bit better, but it's still pretty spiky. The interwar period when the Federal Reserve was active, but it wasn't really independent, and it didn't have its modern tools. We didn't have the modern Fed. And then kind of 1971 is when you started to have the modern Fed. And basically for the last 40 years, you can see how smooth that line is, that basically inflation is not something anyone worries about ever anymore. Like the Fed has gotten really good at like controlling inflation. So, if you want to end the Fed and all this other stuff that people talk about, like you're welcome to go back to the days of the bimetallic standard and the gold standard. But this is a tale of the Fed being incredible at what they do. So yeah, I am all in on like the neoliberal meme of like worshiping the Fed and Ben Bernanke as a golden god and all of that. 100%.
A great example of competent government, like improving people's lives, making their lives better without I think substantially reducing anybody's freedom. So pretty good stuff. Jim and Ham saying helicopter money. That's a good meme. Okay, so yeah, it's let's see, we're talking about Bernie Sanders. We're talking about now Joe Biden. One of the things that I've consistently heard when I talk about Joe Biden here, and there aren't, as you may have guessed, Joe Biden doesn't have a lot of streamers playing him up on Twitch. Destiny talks about him in a positive light.
His fan base is not online.
They're extremely. They're not extremely online. They're extremely cable. Maybe not even cable news. I don't know if they're watching cable news or what. But one of the things I consistently hear is, okay, congrats, neolibtard. You got your candidate. Well, now what are you going to do? You're not going to beat Trump. That's for damn sure. You gave up your best chance to beat Trump with Bernie Sanders. And now you're sunk. You think this guy's going to be able to do it? And yes. I gotta say, I don't know what it's based on, other than basically a selective reading of his public speaking. But
yeah, I mean,
what do you think about that?
I don't know. It's related to the pundit's fallacy. If you know the pundit's fallacy, that's kind of like, well, this politician is only unpopular because they didn't take the position that I wanted them to take. And if they had taken the position I wanted them to take, then obviously they would be super popular. And the easiest way to win elections is to follow all of my policy advice. And then you will be popular and win the election.
There you go.
And everybody makes this. The neoliberals make it, socialists make it, conservatives make it. Everybody is very, very confident that their preferred policy views and ability to get elected are perfectly correlated. And it's not true. You see it on every side. So I try to be very careful about this. I don't know whether Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump is going to, I don't know whether Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden is going to beat Donald Trump. I think that the polling suggests Biden has a better chance with the evidence that we have now. Bernie Sanders' whole theory of the race, his whole theory of beating Donald Trump is that, hey, I can get out new voters. I can drive a political revolution, and we're going to, change the country with all these new voters. And, if that just doesn't seem to be the case. I would love for there to be a lot more new voters and for youth to be way more energized. Even if they disagree with me, like participation is good. I don't see a whole lot of theories that say political participation is a bad thing, but that, at some point you have to look at the data and say Bernie's theory of the case is not correct.
Yeah.
And Joe Biden is actually driving increased turnout. So, does that mean he's going to win? I have no idea. I think he's probably a small favorite. A lot depends on how the economy goes this year. The stock market seems to have essentially priced in a very high chance that we're going to go into a recession. The bond market, the price of bonds is ridiculous right now. I think the interest payments are something like 0.5% for 30-year bonds. Which,
just trying to save my money, please.
It's wild how low the interest payments on bonds are now. But these are very strong signals that things are going to get bad. And if the recession hits this year, to state the obvious, that's very bad for Trump. And nobody should ever cheer for a recession.
No,
by the way.
not at all.
And it's lives get ruined, and it's a terrible thing. But you do have to acknowledge politically that it has an impact, and the impact is going to be on the incumbent.
No, I think it's absolutely true. And apparently President Trump's gonna address the nation about the coronavirus pandemic. Do you want to check that out? I imagine it won't be very long.
Is that happening right now? Or
apparently it's going to happen right. I think either right. Oh yeah, it's happening now. You want to check it out?
Sure. Yeah, we can turn it on.
All right, I've got it. We'll play it right now.
Countries as the virus spread its horrible infection. And taking early, intense action, we have seen dramatically fewer cases of the virus in the United States than are now present in Europe. The European Union failed to take the same precautions and restrict travel from China and other hotspots. As a result, a large number of new clusters in the United States were seeded by travelers from Europe. After consulting with our top government health professionals, I have decided to take several strong but necessary actions to protect the health and well-being of all Americans. To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days. The new rules will go into effect Friday at midnight. These restrictions will be adjusted subject to conditions on the ground. There will be exemptions for Americans who have undergone appropriate screenings, and these prohibitions will not only apply to the tremendous amount of trade and cargo, but various other things as we get approval. Anything coming from Europe to the United States is what we are discussing.
Pause real quick.
These restrictions will also not.
Whoa.
Because is it just me, or is he like super low energy whenever he has to read off a script like this? Like, you can tell that he did not write this. He did not write this. Like, somebody wrote this for him, and he's not happy about having to read it. And he's kind of like, I am doing this. I am going to restrict all the things. And he's using big words that he never says. Like, is it just me, or can you tell when he's doing a loose kind of, I'm loose, I'm rolling, I'm doing the Trump stuff, and when he's having to read something somebody else wrote?
I can't believe he just said we're gonna not just people, no trade with Europe. Let's see. Whoa.
Not apply to the United Kingdom. At the same time, we are monitoring the situation in China and South Korea. And as their situation improves, we will reevaluate the restrictions and warnings that are currently in place for a possible early opening. Earlier this week, I met with the leaders of health insurance industry who have agreed to waive all co-payments for coronavirus treatments, extend insurance coverage to these treatments, and to prevent surprise medical billing. We are cutting massive amounts of red tape to make antiviral therapies available in record time. These treatments will significantly reduce the impact and reach of the virus. Additionally, last week I signed into law an $8.3 billion funding bill to help CDC and other government agencies fight the virus and support vaccines, treatments, and distribution of medical supplies. Testing capabilities are expanding rapidly day by day. We are moving very quickly. The vast majority of Americans, the risk is very, very low. Young and healthy people can expect to recover fully and quickly if they should get the virus. The highest risk is for elderly population with underlying health conditions. The elderly population must be very, very careful. In particular, we are strongly advising that nursing homes for the elderly suspend all medically unnecessary visits. In general, older Americans should also avoid non-essential travel in crowded areas. My administration is coordinating directly with communities with largest outbreaks, and we have issued guidance on school closures, social distancing, and reducing large gatherings. Smart action today will prevent the spread of the virus tomorrow. Every community faces different risks, and it is critical for you to follow the guidelines of your local officials who are working closely with our federal health experts, and they are the best. For all Americans, it is essential that everyone take extra precautions and practice good hygiene. Each of us has a role to play in defeating this virus. Wash your hands, clean often used surfaces, cover your face and mouth if you sneeze or cough, and most of all, if you are sick or not feeling well, stay home. To ensure that working Americans impacted by the virus can stay home without fear of financial hardship, I will soon be taking emergency action, which is unprecedented, to provide financial relief. This will be targeted for workers who are ill, quarantined, or caring for others due to coronavirus. I will be asking Congress to take legislative action to extend this relief. Because of the economic policies that we have put into place over the last 3 years, we have the greatest economy anywhere in the world by far. Our banks and financial institutions are fully capitalized and incredibly strong. Our unemployment is at a historic low. This vast economic prosperity gives us flexibility, reserves, and resources to handle any threat that comes our way. This is not a financial crisis. This is just a temporary moment of time that we will overcome together as a nation and as a world. However, to provide extra support for American workers, families, and businesses, tonight I am announcing the following additional actions. I am instructing the Small Business Administration to exercise available authority to provide capital and liquidity to firms affected by the coronavirus. Effective immediately, the SBA will begin providing economic loans in affected states and territories. These low-interest loans will help small businesses overcome temporary economic disruptions caused by the virus. To this end, I am asking Congress to increase funding for this program by an additional $50 billion. Using emergency authority, I will be instructing the Treasury Department to defer tax payments without interest or penalties for certain individuals and businesses negatively impacted. This action will provide more than $200 billion of additional liquidity to the economy. Finally, I am calling on Congress to provide Americans with immediate payroll tax relief. Hopefully, they will consider this very strongly. We are at a critical time in the fight against the virus. We made a life-saving move with early action on China. Now we must take the same action with Europe. We will not delay. I will never hesitate to take any necessary steps to protect the lives, health, and safety of the American people. I will always put the well-being of America first. If we are vigilant and we can reduce the chance of infection, which we will significantly impede the transmission of the virus. The virus will not have a chance against us. No nation is more prepared or more resilient than the United States. We have the best economy, the most advanced health care, and the most talented doctors, scientists, and researchers anywhere in the world. We are all in this together. We must put politics aside, stop the partisanship, and unify together as one nation and one family. As history has proven time and time again, Americans always rise to the challenge and overcome adversity. Our future remains brighter than anyone can imagine. Acting with compassion and love, we will heal the sick, care for those in need, help our fellow citizens, and emerge from this challenge stronger and more unified than ever before. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you.
Wow. So no more trade with Europe until.
All right, so I've got a couple hot take reactions.
Wow.
I'll give you.
Yeah.
So number one is this is exactly why you don't want an idiot like Trump in place, because I don't trust him to get this right. Like,
well,
what are they?
That's decisive action he's just taken. I mean, come on.
So here's the thing. There's a couple thoughts. He's throwing around big numbers like they mean something, like $50 billion in small loans or in low interest loans for small business. Like that's, let's be real, that's super like small potatoes. That's super small fries. $200 million for some other program is literally like a drop in the bucket. Like that'll last you like 3 days. So a lot of these numbers are like, it's the Republican thing where they just don't want to spend money ever. Like, so I'm not impressed by that. The payroll tax thing has been floated and is also kind of, it's probably a good idea, but it's the worst way to do a good idea. Payroll taxes disproportionately are going to help people who are already rich. Like somebody who's making minimum wage and gets no work and can't make rent now. Right. Like how is a payroll tax deduction gonna be, like, they're not getting a payroll anymore, and even if they were, it'd be like an extra $1 an hour or something. What it's really going to do is it's going to give quite a lot of money to people who make several $100,000 a year. That's where most of the money is going to go.
Well, so, I mean, to try and be charitable to him, I mean, is he doing everything that's possible for him to? Is he talking about basically stuff he can do without Congress? I mean,
no. He needs Congress to do the payroll tax deduction. So he's just asking them to do it. Yeah. It would be better if they really want to like stimulate demand, they should just give everyone a flat fee rather than doing give everyone. This is the UBI people are going to go crazy and enjoy, but like the better way to stimulate things is to give an equal amount of money to everyone rather than cutting payroll taxes, which effectively gives lots of money to the upper middle class. But no, I don't know. Did he say he's going to kill all trade with Europe?
I'm pretty sure, folks. I mean, I
almost didn't catch that part. Is that what he said?
I'm pretty sure that's what he said. No, not just no people. I thought he said not all travel, but also goods. Went back and looked at it. I'm pretty sure I heard goods. I pull this. Let's see.
Did he say he was suspending all trade?
Okay.
I'm trying.
Least. Okay. Well, then at least all travel.
Somebody says. He said all trade except UK. Why on earth would the UK matter here?
Travel ban to Europe. Yeah, travel ban to Europe. Okay, except I guess the UK. Yeah, I did. We did catch that part.
Travel ban, except. I mean, at this point, it doesn't matter though. Like at this point, even if you literally built a literal like wall, space dome, 100% effectiveness, nobody can travel in or out of the United States. Like it's here in almost every state already.
Just to be clear, apparently, if you are in Europe, you have 2 days to get here because it kicks in midnight on Friday. So,
there's 200 cases in New York already. Yeah. There's 200 cases in New York. There's 1,000 cases nationwide. Like it's going to spread.
Yeah.
This strikes me as like, I mean, I don't know. I'm going to kind of, I want to give a ton of hot takes here. I want to wait for the actual experts in epidemiology to weigh in on Twitter.
Yeah.
But because there's some people I've been following who are experts in the spread of disease and will give better you or I.
Sure.
Again, everybody should never listen to anything streamers say, including me. But like, I want to kind of see what they say. But at the same time, it strikes me that like is this going to do anything if there's already 1,000 cases in confirmed cases?
It's probably got to do more than nothing, but I mean that's that's a real. I mean, it's got
So here's a thought experiment. If we've got 1,000 confirmed cases in the U.S., which means there's probably more like 5 to 10 to 20,000 unconfirmed cases because we've been testing nobody. The United States has tested an extremely small number of people compared to other countries. So if we've got 5 to 10,000 cases, what percentage of new cases in the United States would have come from someone overseas?
Let's see.
1%?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty thin. I've got a coronavirus update map here that's kind of cool. I'll share with you. I dropped a link in the chat if you'd like to check it out as well. But it, I mean, let's see what else we've got. Italy is somehow, I don't know why Italy is the second worst afflicted country in the world right now, but
Italy just got it before us. The thing is, we're on the same track as Italy. We're tracking them pretty well. But it hit Italy about 10 days before it hit the United States. So if you want to look at where we're going to be in 10 days, Italy right now is a pretty solid indicator of that.
Man. Let's see if we've got I'm not sure if this site provides graphs of the growth in Italy. It does in mainland China, so maybe it's there for Italy as well. But haven't tried that yet.
Italy has grown extremely quickly.
Wow. Well, folks, check that out if you're interested in some kind of more granular data on just COVID-19, that is, say, coronavirus cases. I'll drop the link one more time if anybody's interested. So, wow. I don't know. I got to say, though,
the only upside I can see from this, actually, you know what? I will say,
sure.
Again, I don't know enough to know whether I'm an idiot on a stream somewhere. So take me as that. Take me as the idiot on stream. But I think that the actual travel ban will probably do very little because it's already here in thousands of cases. What I will say is that him coming out like this might shake loose the morons out of their slumber, because we looked at the replies on like the NCAA's tweet, right?
Yeah, I mean, once the president's saying no travel from Europe, then it starts to get hard to say, these libtards, just the media.
Media scam. It's you're all panicking and hyperventilating over nothing. And if the president has done this, we live in a hyper-partisan world where everything is partisan and it's poisonous, but if he's done this, maybe that will actually have an impact. If he says if Trump finally says don't go into crowds, maybe people will stop going into crowds who would have otherwise done it. So that, I think, is actually great in terms of just making a big statement, even if the actual actions might not be as effective as I think. And I should probably wait for the experts to weigh in there, but the impact of him just saying it could be big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's. I wonder if it will inspire more confidence though than it will fear. I really don't know. It's interesting to think about. I guess we'll see tomorrow when the markets open up. What folks think.
Did he say? I'm really. It would be wild if he had said no trade. That seems almost like
I must have just heard that. I must have just heard that because it doesn't sound like anybody else heard that. So.
Yeah, if nobody else heard that, then because that would be wild. Because that's even I can't imagine an expert would have told him that. Nobody's done that, have they? China's not shut down trade. Italy's not trade.
A lot of I think a lot of orders out of China have slowed or stopped, but I don't think it was the result of any kind of order. But somebody in here is saying
everybody. Sorry, what do you say?
So, I mean, now I've got some people saying he said goods and services. Okay, well, I'll keep Googling around here.
Oh, good Lord, yeah. Jesus, if there's no trade with Europe for a month, I mean, I'm trying to make the devil's advocate case in my head. Like, trade is actually not that big of a part of the U.S. economy.
Well, it's like 8%, 8 to 10% of the entire economy, but that's still like of our trade partners. I think Europe is.
It interrupts supply line. Like even a lot of goods that are made here in the United States require parts and sourcing from other places. So yeah, I mean, if we literally cut off all trade with Europe for a month, that's guaranteed recession.
Okay.
Guaranteed. I cannot imagine how you would avoid a recession in that case.
Okay. Let's see here. So all travel from Europe to the United States has been suspended for 30 days beginning Friday at midnight. The restrictions won't apply to the United Kingdom, and the U.S. would monitor the situation to determine if travel could be reopened earlier. Exceptions will be made for Americans who have undergone the appropriate screening. I know some people in the chat were saying, oh, is Destiny back yet? Well, whether he's back here or not, he'll probably be okay if he gets the appropriate screening.
Okay, so
yeah.
Wild. I love that they had to put tremendous in there because it's the only word Trump knows. This tremendous amount of trade and cargo.
Yeah.
Dude, that's wild. I don't know, man. I can't. I don't think this is something anybody was talking about. Like, and the other thing is, he said Europe. Yeah. Like, are we not quarantining from China? Are we not stopping trade with China?
I mean, I guess.
Trade with Japan?
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought for the. I mean, if you're gonna.
What?
I really
That's another
know.
thing. Yeah, I just keep coming up with reasons. Like, why would an expert have said this? And like, why would an expert say all travel from Europe is banned, but not?
I mean, is okay? Good to know. Destiny is
anywhere else.
But yeah, I mean, I guess is the consensus that in Asia they have managed to squash its the epidemic phase of this disease. You know, they brought those curves flat. I agree. You know, but
well, again, I want the experts to, but it's so confusing. It's like. Yeah. It seems like he just wanted to do a big, strong thing and like be seen.
Real Altria says they've already put restrictions on travel from China. So,
I mean, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I honestly don't like.
The
are
UK
they
being left out though is interesting.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Like, is this? I'm guessing this is literally like he had a phone call with Boris Johnson and Boris was nice to him. so he didn't say the UK.
Let's see how many cases they've got in the UK. UK is UK is I guess 459 cases. They're doing better than the other major European countries, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere though. Yeah. It's, at this point, nowhere will stop it from coming. It's a matter of mitigation, what they call flattening the curve, so that your cases occur very slowly rather than having this giant spike all at once. Because one of the dangers that's been described to me by someone who knows how they're epidemiologists, they know how these things work, is not just that 1% of people will die or whatever the percentage is. It's that. I think it's something like 80% have very mild symptoms. Somewhere between 15 to 20% have symptoms that cause them to go to the hospital, and 1% die. But those 15 to 20% need a hospital. So, like, what happens if everybody's getting it once? If the peak is really high before it comes down, then the hospitals get overwhelmed. There's no beds. Ventilators are limited. Hospitals do not have unlimited ventilators, and a lot of times they actually need to put these people on ventilators to save them.
Yeah.
So when this all happens at once, additional people die who shouldn't have died because there's nothing to help them. And so they talk about flattening the curve. What you're doing here with all these restrictions is not stopping the disease, but you're limiting it so that it kind of slowly grows so that there's actually enough hospital beds for people all at the same time.
Yeah.
And this is what's been successfully done in China and South Korea. If you look at like in Hubei province, I think in Hubei province, the death rate was closer to like 4 or 5% or something because it ran wild there with that for a month, nothing was done. And in the rest of China, it's closer to like 1%.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a variety of theories too. Like the pollution has just all the air pollution has since it's a respiratory infection. The air pollution there has just weakened people's ability to resist diseases like this too.
Absolutely.
But anyway you slice it, man, that is just so crazy. I mean,
that's one of my hidden kind of things that I'm oddly passionate about is pollution. I think people have no idea how massive the impacts from pollution are.
Yeah.
Like we're talking tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people die every year because of pollution. And the only reason we don't see it is because it's like this aggregate thing. You have to like do economic studies and like measure the pollution here in this one place versus pollution in this other place, and like what are the rates of asthma, what are the rates of heart attacks, but like everything gets worse with pollution. People have more heart attacks, they have more asthma attacks, lung disease goes up, just old people have generally higher death rates.
Yeah,
it's
like crazy.
literally hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah, and of course, just to be clear, I mean, I think you basically just made this point. It certainly isn't just not to just pick on China. I mean, we have this in the United States, not to the same degree, fortunately, anymore. I don't know if we ever, well, I don't know, but admittedly, anyway, slice it, we still have those problems in the United States. You can still see the effect of air quality on people's health, and there are places like, I know, Salt Lake City, for example, because of its geography, get some real bad smog days sometimes, thanks to inversion. It's a real mess sometimes. So it's I mean, it's super tragic. And we actually we watched a video once. We were talking about crime on one stream, and just somebody started talking about the lead crime hypothesis, where leaded gasoline, and then the use of lead in a variety of products, but primarily leaded gasoline, which you would burn, which then, a very insidious form of air pollution, may have been the factor that drove crime rates more than any other. And then once it was cleaned up, a generation later, crime rates just suddenly started to plummet. Aren't we so pat ourselves on the back for our innovative policing methods, or maybe just for getting all the lead out of the...
So I did a podcast episode, actually, with a expert in this area.
Mm-hmm.
Her name is Karen Clay. She's an economist who studies this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And literally, like, there are studies where you can do, like, there's you've got a major highway, right? You've got a highway going here vertically, and you've got elementary school on one side, elementary school on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Same town. They're not that far apart, but the prevailing wind goes this way. And so they literally can do studies where they look at one elementary school versus another. And when students move into the district, students who move to this school experience no drop in scores. Students who move to this school experience this significant drop in scores just because they're downwind of the highway and all the fumes. It's wild. It's wild how much this stuff impacts everything. And in China, it's even worse. Like in China, it's even worse than it was in the U.S. in the 70s when it was bad in the U.S.
Yeah.
And on top of that, a lot of people still smoke in China. Smoking has been on the decline in a lot of Western countries, especially in the U.S. Very few people smoke anymore. In China, there's still a ton of people who smoke.
Do you watch or have you ever listened to a speech by Peter Zeihan?
I'm not familiar.
Geopolitics guy. He's kind of got famous. He wrote a couple of books, the Absent Superpower, about the United States, and then a book he released recently called Disunited Nations. And basically, his theory is over the next since the Cold War, the United States has been gradually disengaging from the world. Not even consciously doing so, just because it doesn't have the kind of guiding mission that had it so intertwined with the rest of the world during the Cold War, when it was trying to curtail and defeat the Soviet Union all around the world. And without that, the United States has kind of moved to a more natural state for the U.S., which is sort of disengagement. And his theory is that this is going to leave the rest of the world almost universally in a much worse place. And that while it won't have much impact on the average American, it's going to make life real difficult for countries like, for example, China, who are dependent on world trade for their livelihood. A country that has to import a lot of food, has to import virtually all of its fossil fuels. And so it's interesting, just thinking about, China, even though it seems like, by a lot of indicators, second superpower, right? It's got some real challenges that we are fortunate here not to have.
To disentangle two things there.
Yeah.
There's the American disengagement in terms of not being as active in a military geopolitical sense, which I think since the end of the Second World War and the Cold War has been true. The one big exception would be Bush's adventure into Iraq. But that certainly turned out to be really, really, really unpopular in the end, and now has driven this, very, very non-interventionist school of thought in the United States. And not to debate whether that's right or wrong. I'm sure people have their opinions, but more just to acknowledge that we are way less interventionist as a public than we used to be. Nobody cared in the actual 80s that we went into Nicaragua or whatever. Like it's a minor scandal because the president and blah, 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 but it wasn't like this big national defining issue the way that the Iraq war was.
Yeah.
And, we used to just invade countries all the time. We would, there was Korea, there was Vietnam, there was all sorts of Latin American things. We tried to have a coup against the government of Iran.
Yeah.
We're just a very adventurous country. And then the Cold War ended, and I think it's right that we kind of stepped back a little bit. We had some stuff in Yugoslavia, but the big resurgence, the try was Iraq, and it went really badly. And so now we live in a world where Americans don't want to get into a bunch of foreign military adventures.
Yeah.
So I think that's right, but I think we have to disengage that from the more globalist, like immigration and trade part of it, because that I don't think that America is like stepping back from the world.
Yeah.
I think that America is doing just as much. I'd actually be curious to look this up, how much trade America does over time. I'm pretty sure that it's gone up. Like the amount of trade with China has clearly been increasing over the last few decades. Immigration, even though we've had restrictions recently, like I think we are near a high point in terms of what percentage of our population is foreign born. It's like 12% right now. And that's pretty high. That's higher than it's been in like 50 years.
I think
so, in terms of immigration and trade, I don't think that America is stepping.
But those are a little more, I guess, a little more passive than the kind of involvement the U.S. has been, has engaged with. And I guess his theory is that America is going to stop policing the oceans for everyone. So other countries that rely on, I guess, this American security guarantee that are also more reliant on trade are going to they've got a rough future ahead. Whereas the United States, even if the United States traded less, and like you said, it doesn't seem to be doing that. It's going to be all right, even if it did.
I mean, that's an interesting theory because the U.S. has had massive naval superiority for a very long time. The U.S. Navy. There's a fun argument about if the U.S. Navy and Air Force were fighting all of the other air forces and navies of the world combined, who would win? And genuinely, just about everybody says the U.S. Navy. Like.
The U.S. certainly the U.S. Navy, and maybe the Air Force it's a little tougher, but the Navy is absolutely unparalleled.
The U.S. Air Force is by far and away the number one Air Force. U.S. Navy, like I think we have more carriers than the rest of the world combined.
Yeah, and they're all like
super class.
Right.
Yeah, I forget what. I'm not a Navy. There's boat people who are like crazy.
The Gerald R. Ford class supercarrier, the next generation of even bigger carriers they're building now.
They're the super class. Everybody else's carriers are like mini class carriers. We have super class carriers or whatever. So we have been in this role for a long, long time where we police the waters around Europe and we police the waters around the Middle East and we police the South China Sea. It's a big issue now with China because China's like not real happy when we like run our super carriers around Taiwan, which is super close. Like that's literally like looking in on China, and China thinks it sucks, and like they want to turn this South China Sea into a Chinese lake.
Yeah.
The rest of the region is not super. Japan and Korea and Vietnam and Thailand and the Philippines and Indonesia, they're not super happy about like China trying to take the whole thing over. There's a bunch of territorial claims and stuff, but it generally stays kind of at a simmer rather than at a boil because the U.S. has all these carriers floating around. And so that's an interesting theory. I don't know that we can predict whether the U.S. will step back from that particular role. If they do, China would rapidly step into the hegemon role, at least in the South China Sea. China would be very glad to police the South China Sea, and then they would have, kind of control over all the trade going through there. But China doesn't have the resources to like police the rest of the world. They're not going to police the Middle East or the coast of Africa or, Europe or anything like that. They don't have the state capacity to go anywhere else. They just want to police like their backyard, basically. That's their goal.
Well, the reason it's interesting to hear him talk about this, not talking about it too much, is just that his theory is that China's basically, because it doesn't have that state capacity, they're not going to be able to cut it in this world of future unless the United States stays engaged in the world writ large. And that, fundamentally, I guess that's the collapse of China. So I don't know. I mean, hard to envision today, but it's probably hard to envision the fall of the USSR in the 70s.
It's interesting to think about these things, but foreign policy discussions are often really circular because like there's no counterfactual. You can't do a lot of great research in the same way that you can, like, if we've raised the minimum wage, you can wait 10 years and, get like a dozen super high quality papers that you'll know exactly what the effect of the minimum wage increase was. With foreign policy, this is all just counterfactuals and speculation. And you can have some really smart people who have interesting things to say, and you should listen to them. The smart people are not me and Bastiat; they're other people. But foreign policy experts will have these smart ideas. But in the end, there's you don't know the counterfactual. You don't know what would have happened otherwise. So it's kind of
So let's see. We've got a few questions here. Let's take a few questions. If folks, if you've got some, and you'd like to ping me with them, I'll ask them. Well, and that's not an open license to ask anything, but give me some good questions. I'll bring them. First of all,
very welcome.
I like this question here. Why did Jeremiah Johnson pick that handle? Is that his actual name?
Yes, Jeremiah Johnson is my actual name.
Some good alliteration.
I was named after a 1970s Robert Redford movie about a man who fights grizzly bears. You can Google this. Yeah, no, Bastiat, Google Jeremiah Johnson and bring it up for them. Go to Google.
Jeremiah Johnson fights bears. Wow, this is wow. Okay.
Yeah, this is like young Robert Redford, like handsome, rugged Robert Redford. He's much better looking than I am.
Holy moly! So this is wow, Jeremiah Johnson. This guy fights bears. Damn. And apparently we've got some fans of the movie in chat. Pretty good.
It's a great movie. It's like this 1800 kind of city slicker dude who goes out into the Wild West and literally fights bears, and it's cowboys and Indians kind of thing. And it's a really great Western. It's one of the better Westerns of all time. Wow. And my dad saw that movie when he was 10 years old in the 70s. And he said, "Hey, my last name's Johnson. I'm going to name my kid that one day because that guy's a badass." And then 15 years later or whatever, he did name his kid that. So there you go.
Well, it sounds good to me. I like it. And yes, Jen Benim says, "Oh my God, it's the source of that nodding gif." Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
if you Google Jeremiah Johnson, you'll see it right there. Wow. Yeah. Okay. Navier and Stokes asked, Bastiat, I was one of the original supporters of the Neoliberal Podcast and Kickstarter. I wanted them to do an episode on how corruption can affect institutions and how to combat it. As someone who grew up in an extremely corrupt country, Mexico, this is important to me. Is there any chance that something like this will happen in the future?
That's a very good question. So I'll say two things. The first thing is that I've reached out to Darren Ajamolu, who is the Why Nations Fail guy. We haven't been able to get a response from him back yet because he's way too busy for a Z-tier podcast to come on. I mean, we've actually had some good success with economists. Yeah. Economists, we've gotten some big name economists. So I still hold some hope for Mr. Ajamolu. Right. But we haven't gotten him yet. He's the ideal. Why Nations Fail is the theory about how bad institutions and corruption are super bad for your country, and it just kills economic growth. Yeah. It's very bad. So I would love to do that. We do talk about it all the time. If you listen to the podcast, I probably mention him in 1 out of every 3 or 1 out of every 4 episodes. Yeah. It's kind of my core worldview is that institutionalist worldview. The other thing we are doing is we've got a series now called Liberalism Around the World on the podcast, where we have people from different countries come in and just talk about what is the state of liberalism in my particular country. What do liberals here believe? What is the political scene like? What are the biggest issues in my country? And how do liberals and liberalism as a philosophy respond to those issues? So we've done a couple episodes of that. It's not on a regular schedule. It's kind of every once in a while we'll do a Liberalism Around the World. We did one in Chile, talking about the riots there. We did one in Catalonia, where we talked to a group from Barcelona and who are kind of advocating for a greater degree of autonomy for the Catalonian people. And so I am very interested in doing more of those episodes that look at different places around the world. What are the challenges liberals face? And in a lot of those episodes, I think institutions and corruption are going to be a very common theme as we do more of those.
Right on. Well, that sounds good. Have you talked to anybody who focuses or specializes on Mexico yet?
We have not. Right. So we're always looking, though. I'm always putting my feelers out for podcast episodes. So I appreciate that comment. Yeah, I mean, thanks for being one of the original patrons and one of the Kickstarters. we're very, very grateful for all those people because, we right now we have actually kind of a quote unquote made it in the sense that, we kind of got institutional funding from a think tank, but they never would have done that. We never would have gotten that institutional funding if they couldn't see that there was like real grassroots support for this from, just anonymous people all over the place. So like that was really, really important in kind of helping to make this a thing.
Absolutely. Is the Institute, Progressive Policy Institute, are they funded by George Soros?
God, I hope so. As far as I know, I don't think they are. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't go through, I literally, and this is one of those things, once you get institutional funding, people are always going to be like, well, such and such cut your institution a check 5 years ago. And so, therefore you are in the pocket of big whatever, whatever, big banks, big Democrats, big pharma. I don't even know who funds people.
I know.
They provide funds for us now, but I have never checked who is giving them money. So I don't know who I'm shilling for.
Well, did you, and we just, I don't know if you saw this in the chat, the NBA has just suspended the season.
Whoa.
As of a couple of minutes ago. Yeah. Adrian Wojnarowski tweeted out the NBA has suspended the season. First comment from 3-year letterman, utterly pathetic. This is why I forced the players on the youth football team I coach to get 5 flu shots each without parental knowledge this week. You have to be cautious so this nonsense doesn't happen.
That guy's a troll. He does this on everything. You notice that people like him. He gets people.
Man. That's pretty good.
He always ends it with, I'm a coaching legend, not some random clown.
There's his giveaway. That's a good one. That's a good one. Okay.
Yeah.
No, these are not so bad.
That's the craziest Woj bomb I've ever seen. I'm a big NBA fan. I follow the NBA, so I wonder, are there gonna be playoffs or just canceling everything?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just frozen in place till they pick back up.
I mean, I'm glad that people are taking this seriously because not to sound like an alarmist, but like the people who sounded like alarmists 2 or 3 weeks ago are the ones who were right.
Yeah, and maybe this was tweeted out a few minutes ago. I mean, maybe the president's speech gave them the cover. Maybe like this is a real-time demonstration of the theory you were saying there that, well, this is serious business now. So if you wanna take serious action, you can say, look, think
one of the
what
things
you
I would
will.
tell all the people here, because I'm telling people in my life this is make sure if you have grandparents, everybody's young here, everybody's a Zoomer on the internet, so. Zoomers, talk to your grandparents, and they might not text or whatever, like literally actually talk to them, but not in person. Obviously, call them. Tell your grandparents not to go to big events. Don't go out into crowds. Grandparents are the kind of people who are watching Fox News and might not take this seriously, and are the kind of people who might die from this. Like, if you have old people in your family, if you have sick people in your family, like you could actually help what's going on by telling them to not go around.
Yeah, and it's I mean the mortality rates for them are like 15, I think 10 to 20%. So it's tragic stuff. If you if folks were unnecessarily exposed to coronavirus, that's just tragic.
Yep. And I mean, like I said, at this point, we're just trying to slow it down. It's going to be around for a while. We're living in Corona world now, but the goal is to make it a long, slow thing rather than a sharp spike thing.
The line in question from the speech. Okay, according to this is just a live update from Twitter here. The line from the speech was, the new rules will go into effect Friday at midnight. These restrictions will be adjusted subject to conditions on the ground. There will be exemptions for Americans who have undergone appropriate screenings, and these prohibitions will not only apply to the tremendous amount of trade and cargo, but various other things as we get approval. Anything coming from Europe to the United States is what we are discussing. These restrictions will also not apply to the United Kingdom.
I gotta give a shout out to, who is this? Roman Taco 5. That's hilarious. Just say no. Coronavirus cannot enter your body without consent.
There you go. Yeah, if it does, then it's violated the non-aggression principle.
I'm stealing that for Twitter.
That's a good one.
You're gonna see that on the neoliberal Twitter in 30 minutes. Pretend like it was mine.
Okay, so a couple more. Well, actually, we got a few more questions here. Let's see. First of all, will you ever have Garrett Jones on the podcast? Garrett Jones, author of, among other books, Hive Mind, and I think upcoming or just released 10% Less Democracy, Why You Should Trust Elites a Little More and Masses a Little Less.
God, that's such a neoliberal line. And at least in, I don't know, at least in the sense that we have this aesthetic of like we're all technocrats, and generally what we are like college students like cosplaying as technocrats. But like I'd rather cosplay as a technocrat than as like a cosplaying as a fascist like these people are doing, like the nerds at the freaking Charlottesville rally who are basically like cosplaying Nazism. So in the sense that we do that, I think that book is interesting. It's obviously very provocative to say 10% less democracy, but we have people on the podcast who we don't agree with. So even if I kind of disagree with that, and I'd have to hear his whole argument, I would, we've had many socialists on the podcast. We've had probably 4 or 5 at least. We've had people who are pretty right wing, in terms economically. We've had cultural right wingers. We had Ross Douthat on to talk about
the decadence one.
So that was he's a smart guy. It was a fun conversation. I don't buy into his thesis 100%, but I think he's at least said some things there that are correct while also saying a few incorrect things. So I would have people on the podcast who are kind of promoting interesting ideas, even if I don't necessarily agree with them. I think the 10% less democracy thing is particularly interesting on a local level. I think that like the local level of you need like city permission to do all these things. You have to go in front of the planning board and you have to get community board permission and you have to stand in front of a line of 200 people who all have complaints about the way you want to build a house. That sort of thing is endemic in parts of New York and San Francisco and other major cities. And in that sense, like a little bit less democracy in terms of like community board hearings where NIMBYs scream at you, that might be an argument I buy.
Yeah, I mean, things like that, or maybe in some states, the referendum process seems like it has become too easy for somebody with a few $1 million to get a referendum going, or
especially
it's been too. Yeah, although I think that you could, depending on the state you're talking about, you could also say that the referendum processes have been neutered by special interests. So I think I'd agree with you. It definitely depends on what you're talking about. Okay. Got a comment here from Beefeater who says, "Hey, can you tell Mr. Neoliberal that his Twitter shill-off is congesting my feed? Angry face."
So we run the Neoliberal shill bracket every year, right leading up to March. Right before March Madness, we have Neoliberal shill bracket madness. And it does, I will beg forgiveness. We've been running it for a couple weeks now, especially the early rounds are very, very congested because it's, 64 people, 32 matchups at once. So we kind of spam your feed for that. But right now we're at the final matchup. It's it's Brad DeLong, who was an economic advisor for the Clinton administration and is one of the original like OG neoliberals from the 90s.
Oh, wow.
Versus Scott Lincecum, who we've had on the podcast. He's a trade lawyer at the Cato Institute. So he's a little bit more like right neoliberal, verging kind of into libertarianism, but is like this really amazing advocate for free trade and against tariffs and against a lot of the stupid things that we do with tariffs. And so he's a fun guy.
Right on.
The final thing I'd say is just sorry for that. But we are at the final matchup. It ends in 12 hours, so it'll be done.
Yeah, our very own Sedosia, who goes on Twitter by Ironically Edgy, did pretty well, and we plugged her stuff a bit. She's pulling for DeLong there. Vote DeLong or I shoot. So
it's fun. It's fun how these things pop up, man. Like these are a lot of fun, and like there's always random stories like that. Like her run was super fun to watch.
Yeah, she did. I mean, I think she's still like in the top 10 of vote getters.
She lost to Brad DeLong by like a fraction of a percent, which is like, and it's funny because they were going back and forth too. Like I think she described herself as like a random college student from nowhere, and she's like this Clinton staffer who like literally was one of the most important people in the Clinton administration, is like in my mentions, like talking with me and chatting with me because of this. Like, it's just kind of wild. It's a lot of fun.
Really cool. Really cool stuff. So I thought it was fun. I thought that'd be a nice pivot to be able to ask you about it though. Okay, so we talked Rabby91. We talked a little bit about UBI there. Piloting asks, what are your thoughts on people who like Biden's on-paper policies but don't think he'll be a fighter? And then some people kind of looked at Obama as a weak fighter. Do you think that? How do you feel about that notion that that we need a fighter in office to get things done, and that's why maybe Joe Biden just isn't that kind of person?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a legitimate criticism that's similar to that. I wouldn't phrase it as the word fighter, but there's a criticism that, like, if you compare somebody like Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, where they're reasonably similar policy-wise. They're not exactly the same, but they're reasonably similar. But Pete Buttigieg is all in on the idea of we've got to reform institutions. We can't go back to business as usual. Yeah. Pete wanted to he was in favor of getting rid of the filibuster in the Senate is one thing. He even had a plan to like add more people to the Supreme Court, which I'm not sure is a good idea. Wow. But
that's one of those things that won't stop at one.
Yeah, it shows his commitment to like he wants these deep structural institutional changes. He doesn't think you can just go back to business as usual. Whereas Joe Biden is a little bit more like, I've worked with Republicans in the past, I can work with them in the future. And I think that's a little bit naive as to the state of the GOP right now. I think that there's just no incentive for Republicans to ever work with a Democratic, presidency or a Democratic House. And so I think you can correctly call Biden a little bit naive on that. Whether he's going to get snapped out of that early in his term, we'll see. But I think there's some truth to that. I also think that if the Democrats have the Senate and the House, that on some degree this might not matter. You don't have to fight them as much. So I think one of the better arguments for Biden, even if you don't like him that much, even if you think he's not a fighter, is that pretty clearly, I think the Democrats have a better shot at taking the Senate if Biden is the nominee. Biden helps in Arizona. He helps in Montana. You've got to win. Like, Democratic senators are going to have to win battles in red states in order to take the Senate. And I think Joe Biden has better coattails for that than anybody else would.
For sure. Yeah, we like checking out the betting markets here, pretty regularly. And the chance of winning Senate control really, to the extent you buy into these.
Go back to that and show what it's done in the last.
That's what I was going to say here. It's much better.
There's a little drop down where you could choose like.
I'll pull up the chart here. Okay, let me just adjust the chart to, let's see, use presidency, Senate 2020. With Biden, it's really started to narrow.
Wasn't there a drop down of what's happened in the last? Look at that. So that coincides perfectly with Joe Biden's rise in the polls and dramatic South Carolina Super Tuesday. That's the argument. One of the arguments for Biden, even if you don't like him, he's the most likely to have a Democratic Senate that he can work with.
Yeah, and so that's the fundamental ingredient to any kind of reform. Let's see here, a couple more questions. What do you? Let's see. Has the stimulus, qualitative easing, rate cuts benefited those without any assets or those with assets more? I don't know. I guess. I don't know. What do you think about the? One thing I've heard, maybe this dovetails into something I've heard that I'd be curious about. One thing I've heard is that the next recession, the next time we have a real economic downturn, the Federal Reserve, they can't cut interest rates too much more. They've used up most of the tools in their toolbox. How much? How do you feel about that notion?
So normally that's said as a way to say like the Fed should have been raising rates, recently, because otherwise we won't have anything to do, blah blah blah. I think that's a mistake because it privileges the future above the present. Europe raised rates way before the US did, and Europe got smacked in the face because of it. I think Europe raised the ECB, the European Central Bank, raised rates in like 2011 or something, way before the recovery was complete, and Europe plunged back into recession. Mainland Europe had a second recession after the Great Recession because they started raising rates and their economy tanked again.
Wow.
So the reason we didn't was because we needed to complete the recovery. Normally, you think about what's the punishment for leaving rates low too long. The economy will overheat. Unemployment goes way, 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 way down, which it has. And you'll start to see inflation as like wages go way up, prices increase at the same time. And you'll start to see inflation. And that's when you have this inflationary pressure, you have to lower rates. The thing is, we haven't actually seen inflation. So we've been able to run low rates without much drawback. And so I don't think there was a mistake made to keep rates low, because what happens when you raise rates is it kind of kills off some of the steam from the economy. And yeah, it gives you more ammunition when you have the next recession, but it might also be causing the next recession. Yeah. So like, I don't buy into that entirely. I think the Fed has done a pretty good job managing this. And and as to the other person asking, like, has this only helped the rich or blah, blah, blah? I mean, when the macro economy is helped, everybody's helped. You know, when the fact that we've gone from 10% unemployment very, very steadily, almost straight line down, and it took a long time. The recovery took a while.
It's been pretty crazy though how straight the line has been.
Yeah, it took it took a long time, but we've gone from 10% to 3.5% unemployment, and that helps everybody. Everybody is better off when that many people have jobs.
Yeah, and not just economically. I mean, socially too.
Yep.
Okay, so we got I think we've got, let's see, 2 more questions here. I know we're bumping up on your time limit here.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so just, I'll keep going. You got to cut me off here.
I'll cut you off whenever, man.
All right.
But yeah, I'll give you the signal.
Okay.
That's good.
So Mozad655 asks, does he have any thoughts on long-term ramifications of Westlessness? That is to say, if Russia and China just start picking up allies and countries that America neglects. I guess, that kind of dovetails into what we were talking about earlier about maybe American disengagement. And I guess maybe what is the Belt and Road a good example of this? Maybe Russia's intervention in Syria, where we don't get involved, they do.
I'll say, I mean, so I'm not a foreign policy expert. Again, I say this all the time on these.
I know, but,
I'm willing to give hot takes on anything, but don't take me seriously. But Russia, I am not worried about long term, not even a little bit. Russia is a declining power. Their population is actually declining because people aren't having babies in Russia. Everybody's kind of below replacement rate, but Russia is way below replacement rate. They've got this elderly population. They've got a ton of social problems. They are very much a regional power in decline. They are not going to be a dynamic economy. They don't have, like, the power they have is just military leftovers from the Cold War. So like long term, I don't worry about Russia being this like geopolitical monster. China, there's a better theory that could happen, that China could just continue to expand and gain all this, global prestige. I'm a little bit bearish on China though too.
Yeah.
Because China has some of the same stuff. China has really big demographic problems from the one-child policy. They're essentially they're already Japanifying in the sense that like Japan has this ultra old population and they're famous for it. China's going to be on that same path, except China's not going to be, $45,000, $50,000 person like Japan is. China's still at the like 10 or 12 or 15,000 per person.
Yeah.
So China's still they're going to have massive demographic issues. They have still endemic poverty. They have more people in like, super poverty than the U.S. has people. They've got all these rural people stuck in poverty. As much as they've done to move people out of poverty,
they've still got a long way to go. Yeah,
they've still got hundreds of millions of people in dire poverty, and their state capacity is just not as much as you'd think. They have to devote so much resources to running genocides of Muslims and to wild state spying on their own citizens and social credit. They put most of their effort into that stuff, into internal repression. And the more energy you put into that, the harder it is to project a bunch of power everywhere else in the world. Because most of your capacity as a government is taken up by, literally having a genocide of Muslims like they are right. So there's certain things they're doing that we should be doing. The Belt and Road is a good idea for them.
Basically, they've got a lot of cash grab bag for.
Well, they've got a lot of influence in Africa. But like, I'm a little bit bearish on long term that they're going to turn into this, like they're the next United States. I don't think they ever hit the level that the United States hit in like, the 50s and 60s and 70s. So, we'll see. I'm just a talking head on the internet.
No, I gotcha. I think though it's worthwhile to just to counter somewhat the narrative that these countries are just on the make and we are a declining, crumbling power because it just doesn't seem to be borne out. There are certainly, like you said, there are things we need to do, investments we need to make, but we've got good fundamentals, as you might say.
Yep.
And it's interesting with Russia in particular. Russia, as high as it punches, or tries to punch rather, I was curious, Russia has got about, 140 million people. And I remember one time I looked up the population of Mexico and I was thinking, wow, that's surprising. Over 120 million people now.
Oh, yeah.
And then I was thinking, I wonder what the size of the economy is. About 1.2 trillion in Mexico. In Russia, it's about 1.6. So basically what you've got is a country, that
comparable to Mexico.
Yeah.
With
Mexico with a giant arsenal.
Yeah. Russia's GDP is about the size of Italy.
Yeah.
And it's not, there's no dynamism coming from that. It's mostly oil and gas. Yeah. If oil crashes to $30 a barrel, Russia's economy is smaller than Italy now. It's just it's long-term population and economic fact. The size of your economy determines a lot of things. So I'm bearish on Russia in the long term. Bearish Russia. I probably got time for one more question.
Sure.
Then I gotta.
Right on.
My time will be over. I know you got another thing you're doing. So
that's our last question here actually gets into state capacity. So good tie there. Epistocrat asks him what he thinks about Tyler Cowen's state capacity libertarianism. And I have to confess, I don't know much about this. Have you? Do you know much about the state capacity libertarianism?
So this was funny when it came out. It was like Tyler's trying to invent a way more complicated name that nobody will use for neoliberalism. I do think it shares parts of it, but
to be fair to Tyler Cowen, nobody's going to accuse state capacity libertarianism of installing or propping up Pinochet, right?
God, no, it's funny because people come up with all these terms. You'll hear like left libertarian or bleeding heart libertarian or liberal-tarian. Yeah. You'll hear neoliberal. You'll hear center left, center right. State capacity libertarian is a thing now. Mm-hmm. Ordo liberal. And there's all these complicated terms. We chose neoliberal because it rolls off the tongue pretty well, I think. And it's a phrase that's thrown around in the discourse. I will say, to answer the question, I think there's a difference between Tyler Cowen's vision of state capacity libertarianism and our vision of neoliberalism. Mm-hmm. His state capacity libertarianism basically seems like libertarianism that is okay with a strong state for a few functions, which are mostly centered around like research, development, infrastructure spending, and kind of those like positive ROI investment kind of things. That he's okay with big state, giant state investments in like huge, NASA style things, put a man on the moon, develop the internet, those kind of things. I think our vision is similar. Like I have a lot of desire to see more research and development spending as well, but we also have a pretty good focus on the welfare state, that, we are capitalists who also like the welfare state, and think that, the fact that we have a social safety net is good. I think Tyler Cowen is less impressed by that and is not as much about that. He doesn't put any focus on that or quite as much value on it. And for us, I think that's a big thing, that, that capitalism with a welfare state is better than capitalism without a welfare state.
It's interesting because, the one place in which I often feel out of sorts on this whole neoliberal project is I oftentimes, especially when I'm on the fence about something, I feel like, okay, look, if the freedom interest goes this way, well, consequences be damned. I mean, there are some freedoms that I don't want to sacrifice irrespective of the cost benefit, like American style freedom of speech, for example. And sometimes I wonder how that fits in, because that's not, I don't hear too much about that in the online kind of neoliberal community.
So to get philosophical here for a second, and this will be my last point. It depends on how you define your vision of a good life and how you define freedom. You know, what freedoms are we protecting? Well, it depends on how you define freedom. There's the kind of libertarian version of freedom that it's just, you don't mess with me, I don't mess with you, kind of NAP, non-aggression principle kind of thing. There's a more positive vision of freedom, and I don't mean positive as in good. I mean positive as a technical term that says like you should have the freedom from things like freedom from want, freedom from fear. Those are kind of FDR's freedoms that are considered positive freedoms. And one of the interesting things that I've heard that I buy into a little bit, there's a book written by an economist named Amartya Sen, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, and it's called Development as Freedom. And basically his theory is that, you know, you are the kind of the more free you are, or freedom is being able to live your life the way you want to. People who are able to live their lives as they choose, they are free. And, you know, anything can stop you from being free. It might be a government that like restricts your speech, restricts the way you move and the way you dress. That stops you from being free. But also poverty stops you from being free, because people in poverty are not living their lives in the way they would like to. They're not living their lives in the way they would choose to. And so he thinks like development, economic development, is a form of freedom that we can provide. But it also means that if people are, you know, technically free with, you know, economic rights, but they're so impoverished they can't use them, that they're not actually free. So there's this theory of you're free when you can live your life the way you want to. And that, you know, it could be corporations stopping you from being free if they are stopping you from living your life. It could just be the general economic conditions you're in that make you unfree. It could be the government that makes you unfree. But it's kind of this nuanced version of, you know, of a way to look at freedom that I think is pretty valuable and informs the way I think about policy sometimes. In that, you know, the welfare state, the welfare state, I don't think infringes upon freedom overall, because I think it provides a lot of freedom for a lot of people who would be in a really impoverished state otherwise.
Hey, I mean, I think that makes sense to me. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, Jeremiah, for being here. Again, I hope we can keep doing this every couple.
Yeah, you know what? I really enjoy these, man. Maybe we'll make this a regular thing. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
If you like it, if the viewers like it, maybe we'll come on more often. For
sure. I really appreciate your time. It's been a lot of fun. We'll plug those links again. Neoliberalproject.org.
It is. It's a .org.
Yeah. Neoliberalproject.org. We'll get that there. Lots of cool posters. I'm going to order that poster tonight. Okay, so be sure to check it out, ladies and gentlemen. There it is, right there.
Make sure you get the Feel the Bernanke.
Good stuff. And then the podcast, Neoliberal Podcast. I believe the last episode was, who was it we were talking about earlier tonight? Well, if you could just
which podcast?
The Neoliberal Podcast.
We talked about Karen Clay came on. She's the pollution one.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to remember the last podcast y'all did, most recent one.
The most recent one we did was a budget podcast with Ben Ritz from PPI talking about the budget.
Right on. So lots of interesting stuff. Be sure to check it out again on neoliberalproject.org. So great stuff.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here. We'll talk again soon.